Unjustified negativity has funny ways of rebounding right back at you. Welcome everyone to another episode of the Mere Mortals Book Reviews. I'm your host here, Kyron, live on the 19th of February 2025, 11 a.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time on a Wednesday. Would love if you come join me sometime. And as you might surmise, this is a podcast where I heap wonderful praise on the best country on earth, Aussie, 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 oi, oi, oi. You know, in fact, I actually probably will be doing a bit of that today, but our book for today certainly is not going to be, because we have The Lucky Country by Donald Horne. This book was published in 1964. 247 pages in length. It took me about 5 hours of reading to get through. It's not actually that big in total. Now, this is a rather subjective snapshot, a descriptive, I guess you would call it, turns into opinion, on Australian life in the 1960s. So Mr. Horne, Donald, he creates a depiction of the average person, of their way of life, of the cities, of the countryside, the type of people within it, and our relation to other countries, especially Asia, but also, you know, our ancestors back in the good old England, as well as our brethren in America. And I guess the political landscape as a whole, he also dives into quite a lot. He's rather scathing when you take him as a whole, but he has some, I think, some pretty detailed nuances and minutiae where he seems relatively fair and balanced. How many chapters do we have in total here? I'm seeing 10 with titles like The Australian Dream, What is an Australian, Senses of Difference, Living with Asia, Men at Work, Men in Power, Forming Opinions, The Lucky Country, etc., etc. And these are subdivided into like little mini areas as well. So let's jump on to the main themes and questions. How to describe Australia? Do the leaders of a country determine its fate? What is the political landscape in Australia? Let's just start with the order that the book actually goes in. And so I feel that the start of this book is a really good description of Australia, not only in that time, I didn't get to experience it, so I can't tell that for sure, but also of Australian life now and Australians now. So laid back, living the dream is, I guess, the summary of it. Everybody wants a fair go. They're kind of willing to cut some slack to people who are trying hard, yet even if they are incompetent. Naive to some extent about the harsher realities of other people, of other countries, of life there, and how lucky we actually have it here. I think that's still probably fair to say. He tends to have some nice quotes. I've actually noticed this in the book. He's got these rather like pithy one-liners, which I feel work pretty well. So, for example, I had one here which was, hell has been abolished as unfair to underdogs, which is this kind of mentality that we have about loving underdogs, and how and the kind of religious nature with context to that. He talks about how the only real area that Australians are competitive in is in sport, which I feel is pretty well still true to this day. A whole lot on the fair go mentality, as contrasted to something like tall poppy syndrome, which, for those who don't know, tall poppies is a type of plant that grows in Australia, and if one grows above the rest, you know, it sometimes get cut. And this is an analogy, allegory, probably not, to people who, you know, try and be too cool in Australia. They try and pretend they're better than others, even if they perhaps are, and that they'll get cut at the knees, which, whilst is a thing that gets talked about, I actually don't think actually really happens that much, and we do seem to embody more of this fair go mentality. The balance of just how he described Australia, the way that we interact with each other and things like this, I feel is pretty good. After this, he goes through the people. He goes through location and culture. So he tries to describe the differences between the cities, you know, the classic Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, Adelaide, Perth, and Darwin are the main ones. He doesn't really touch upon the states per se, and the territories, Tasmania, Hobart, adding in there as well. And the thing, whilst he does try and create descriptions of them, I think it's a hard thing to do because Australians are relatively uniform. And he has this sum up at the end, which rings true. Despite extraordinary differences, its people are so much the same. I feel that's rather the case as well. And you can even see this within some subtle things such as our accents. If you've been on the Mere Models Conversations before, and I've done one with Pete Smithson, he is much more of like a Australian history aficionado sort of guy, and also deeply into languages, much like myself. And he has talked about on there why that there's actually no real differences between the Australian slang and accent between cities, and it's more actually a class-based thing. And you'll notice it between people who live in the country versus the city, or people who come from a wealthy neighborhood compared to a poorer one. And so, I personally wouldn't be able to tell if someone is from a different city just based on their accent. That is not a thing that happens. He touches upon many topics of sensitivity with, I think, a fair yet firm touch. So, for example, religion, the importance that plays, and I suppose the lack of importance that even was starting to happen back in his day, the way we work, women's roles in society as well as in the home. Australia's treatment of Aborigines, for example, was poor, but not genocidal if you compare it to other countries, and how other colonizers have treated the native population. We lack nuance of Australia's diversity, yet admits there is kind of no consensus upon how Australia is with regards to Asia and the Asian countries, immigration. All of these topics, I feel he not only describes how it was, but also his opinions on them, and it seemed reasonable. He just seemed like a reasonable guy when it came to all of those things. Then we jump into, I suppose, the more subjective opinion. And so I would have said the whole start was pretty descriptional, and you've gotten a fair idea of that. I'm an Australian. I'm kind of embody it. If you listen to Juan as well, I feel like, you just listen to a bit of us and you'll get a bit of an idea of what Australians are like. Here I am literally with my, scarf on my head, looking like a fool and not taking a book review too seriously. I feel like that's pretty indicative of how Australians are. His subjective opinion gets into, I suppose, sketchier areas, which are much more how he viewed the world. And when it comes to politics, people lose their fucking mind and say stupid things, or they get very fired up and lose perhaps some of the nuance that they have when it comes to more descriptional things that they don't have a part in, or have no, what's the differences between Brisbane and Adelaide? There's no anger, there's no emotion, there's no feelings contained within that. You can be a bit more objective. Yet when it gets into politics, people just lose their mind. And politics was a lot on his mind. He complains a lot, and it's hard to know whether if it was valid or not. Because when you're complaining about a politician, are you complaining about them and the way they're running the country? Do their actions actually have that much import on this, on the way a country actually is run, or are they more a sentiment and an indication of what the country at large is kind of feeling, and they're just an embodiment of that, for example? So, for example, a couple of things he was saying, statements that were lacking behind other industrialized nations in GNP. I guess that was gross national product. Nowadays, I think we say GDP, gross domestic product, and that the amount spent on education or the teacher to student ratio is too low. So he's making very, policy decisions saying this is wrong, we need to fix this, and this is why Australia is not going to do good, or things like this. These I can all understand, but the general moping is, I don't know, of how people are, of there's it's weird because he's complaining about, on one hand he's saying it's the lucky country. Australia's really good in certain regards, where we've actually, our standard of living is really great, especially when you compare it to Asia. And I'll get on to why he says we kind of don't deserve it shortly. But then at the same time, he's complaining that the politicians are doing all these bad things, and it's like, well, which one is it? Are we doing well, or are we not doing well? I guess you could argue that he was saying we're not going to do well, and he kind of has a little bit of this within the book. And I think this is where you can actually see that he was rather wrong, because our standard of living is certainly better than it was back then. People have access to amenities and things that don't exist back in that time. And we're still a rather prosperous nation. And I think he would have predicted that we wouldn't be unless the radical changes, or perhaps even, were they radical changes that he was advocating for? Nah, not particularly, but the changes that he was advocating for, I would say probably haven't come true, yet we're still rather prosperous. So he also talked a lot about communists, unionists, not in a positive light. There was just many sections in this book where he was talking about random Australian stuff. Menzies, the Menzies government, the Menzies Prime Minister was certainly on his mind a lot as well. So the thing that I really noticed within this was there was this inkling, this undertone of wishing for an ivory tower and a strong leader to appear. And this is despite him already saying that Australians are represented. Jesus, I'm adding extra ids on politically per capita, as in we have more politicians than other countries do, which me personally, I don't think that's a great thing, but per capita, but whatever. Some of the other things he describes us: a backwater without intellectuals, have only started to see some men of will who could shape the world, as in these are men who he was sort of saying are like, they have the drive to change things. They have the drive to, innovate, to become powerful, to change the world, I guess, in an essence. And I think all of this culminates in his famous paragraph, which we find in the last chapter here. So if you'll bear with me, and it's rather scathing. And it's funny. This paragraph. I'll read it and then I'll talk about something about it. So, the lucky country, living on our luck. Australia is a lucky country run mainly by second-rate people who share its luck. It lives on the other people's ideas, and although its ordinary people are adaptable, most of its leaders, in all fields, so lack curiosity about the events that surround them that they are often taken by surprise. A nation more concerned with styles of life than with achievement has managed to achieve what may be the most evenly prosperous society in the world. It has done this in a social climate largely inimical to originality and the desire for excellence, except in sport, and in which there is less and less acclamation of hard work. According to the rules, Australia has not deserved its good fortune. Particularly that first line there, you might be thinking like, Jesus, he's just calling out the whole country. And it's hard to exactly parse it. Australia is a lucky country run mainly by second-rate people who share its luck. Now, is he talking specifically about the leaders there, i.e. Australia is run, the people who are running it are second-rate, or is he talking about that the Australians as a whole are second-rate? It's kind of hard to pass that between those two. What he argues in the book is that we don't deserve it. He actually doesn't talk much about the natural resources in terms of that being our luck, which I think would probably be, if you look at the last 60 years, we didn't experience a recession during the GFC, I don't believe, because we basically just mined enough ore and coal, iron ore to paper over any problems that would have happened to us had we been another country. And certainly our resources is what we're kind of known for. We've got a ridiculous amount of mining. I'm personally am a mining engineer, or used to work in that. So, but he doesn't talk about that much in the book. He just talks about that we aren't innovative, we don't create things, and yet somehow we've managed to create a society where people can go by the beach, where they don't have to work 90-hour work weeks, where you can be incompetent, and yet as long as you're trying, you'll still get a fair go and a fair shake of it, and these sorts of things. I love this part about the stealing and innovation, and that we're just stealing ideas from other countries. We were literally China before China. You're welcome, China. We invented that playbook, lol. So I guess to sum up this, are politicians and leaders important? Do they run the country? Are they the ones who actually impact things? Here once again is my opinion. No, I don't think so. And to kind of prove this in a sense, being political here is an option. We don't wear party hats. We don't, if you see signage outside of a person's house when it's coming up to an election day or something like that, it's mostly based on the party, not on the person itself. Or it'll be it'll be for more like a local MP rather than on the party itself. Vote for this guy rather than vote for the party. I got those switched back. It's not a topic that is forced upon you. You can choose to not get involved, and you won't face social repercussions for this. I actually met someone recently who she says that whenever a political discussion comes up and someone asks her opinion or something, she'll just be like, "I like kittens," which I think is actually a pretty good response. I might steal that. When we have elections, they are not a set in stone date like the American ones, where it's a big hullabaloo and a big lead up and media event to it. I personally have gone many years without knowing who the prime minister is. I actually got it wrong recently when I looked it up because I thought it was an older one, and it's actually a different one. It reminds me of a disagreement I had with an Argentinian woman once here in Australia, and she thought I was being reckless for not giving a fuck about politics here. I was pretty much expressing this opinion. You don't need to know about it. It doesn't really matter. The differences between voting for this person or this person, it's largely irrelevant. And her argument was that giving a fuck was important. Otherwise, it would turn into something like her country is. And if you don't know, Argentina, notorious for the poor politicians, the bribery scandals. Shout out to President Milei, who just is being investigated for fraud for promoting a meme coin in the last couple of days. So, nothing has changed. Don't trust politicians. All the standard things that I've been saying for years. And my counter response to that is, if giving a fuck is really working well, does it actually matter? Has it improved your political system? I would say no, and probably that I win the argument by default because she was trying to immigrate to my country and I wasn't trying to immigrate to hers. So, as far as I can tell, they don't really do much here. Politicians perhaps because we don't attach to them a whole lot of weight as a whole, no one's looking towards the Australian Prime Minister and is like, what's he going to do about tariffs, or what's he going to do about this? Or if they are, it's a certain subset, and it's just not a huge thing. Politics, I think rightly so, should be a secondary consideration, and that decisions in your own life are much more important than whatever other people are dictating in elsewhere. Plenty of people who would argue against me on this, I know, but this is my opinion, and there it is. So let's jump into the author, perhaps some extra details. Did I answer, I guess, the initial question of do the leaders of a country determine its fate? I feel in Australia it's more that they are an indication of the sentiment of what perhaps people as a whole are feeling, and that no, they don't really determine its fate. My personal opinion there. Let's jump into the author, extra details. Mr. Horne is a journalist, writer, social critic, and academic, the public intellectual. Perhaps he wouldn't have described himself this way. I believe he passed away in the last decade or two. But if it does get applied to you, then it's probably just. And it does explain his moaning about intellectual life, as I don't think he got the props that he thought he deserved. I feel that I got a strong feeling from that. He was moaning about the lack of public intellectual life in Australia, that we're not well read, that we're, lacking in ideas and creativity and things like this. I think a lot of that was just because he believes he was, and that he wasn't getting this. To back up this claim, he wrote 3 to 5 autobiographies. Fucking 5. 3, I think, kind of really centered upon himself, maybe 5 in total. Now, apparently they're not all me. But I mean, 3 is rather excessive. If you can't find a way of writing about a topic without using yourself in it as a central figure, and just 3 to 5 autobiographies, so like, is this necessary? I think that was kind of an indication of him himself. And he seemed like a man who also didn't know exactly what he wanted, because he did go to live in England for a while, and apparently there, even though the public and intellectual life should be rather stimulating, he wasn't enjoying it there, probably once again because he didn't make a name for himself there. Now, the lucky country, this is getting to the very first thing I was saying, has actually become a term of endearment for Australia, and it's used in a good sense, as in, we are the lucky country. Australia's a great place to be. Whereas in the way that he used it, and particularly in that final sentence, it was meant to be an insult. It's a lucky country. You don't deserve what you got here, and that could change, and that everything could turn bad, and you should heed my warning, sort of deal. And apparently this caused a lot of consternation for him. A quote here: "I've had to sit through the most appalling rubbish as successive generations misapplied this phrase." And this was, of course, because he probably said that in the early 2000s. I can only feel this is karma, to be honest. I feel the descriptions in this book were rather accurate as he was writing it, particularly at the start, around the culture, around the people, around the cities, the location. I felt like those descriptions were rather good. And then as soon as he got into politics and started moaning and bitching, the essence of his writing, the points, started to diminish, and it became less useful. It became a poorer book because of it. And I do feel like a lot of it was unjustified. And I'm not sure that what he was, for example, he was saying, the Australian wool that industry is gonna screw up because of synthetics and things, and like we're not adapting to it and things like this. Whereas if you look now, it's still going strong 60 years later. He had a lot of shoulds, the dreaded should word. This should happen. We should do this. This needs to happen. And I really think he was actually a poor predictor of what would come in the future. And that he probably should have just stuck to the descriptional type thing. So, summary here. I didn't encounter the tirade against Australian privilege that I was expecting. That's kind of what this book was presented to me as. You do see it in that last kind of chapter, but other than that, I felt really good descriptionally at the start, and then really poor as a opinion piece on politics in the second half of the book. So for all of his criticisms of our lack of innovation, I think he actually didn't detail why we were lazy or how we were lazy and why we were lucky. I felt it was rather poor in that sense in getting to the root of that claim of his, other than him just saying we lack intellectuals. That was kind of the root of it. Why innovate, for example, if you are lucky? And it doesn't make sense to me, the predictions he was making of how much we were going to struggle in the future because of our lack of innovation and things like this, such as him arguing that we're going to be engulfed by Asia and we need to adapt technologically and things like this. So overall, I think he's a pretty terrible predictor, and history has shown that and proved him wrong. A decent writer, okay observationalist, rather high and mighty, and puts way too much on politics. So the lucky country as a whole, I'm giving it 4.5 out of 10. If you want to learn about Australian life, sure, particularly in the 1960s, but also today, read the first half. I think you can largely skip everything on politics, and then read the final chapter and see if you would agree with him or not. So yeah, that's the review for today. Let's jump into value for value. There's a value for value podcast available anytime, anywhere, any place for anyone. I'm giving all this value to you upfront. All I'm asking is that you return some of it in some shape or form. Time, talent, and treasure. Time, share this with someone. Give it a like, hit the subscribe, comment, blah 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 blah. Some talent. I want to know book reviews that you think I would enjoy, or books that I would enjoy, and that I should do a review on, of course. So hit me up with any of those. Social links are down below, and join our Discord. We're pretty active in there nowadays. And then finally, some treasure. There's a PayPal link down below. And also, if you go to meremodelspodcast.com/support, got some other ways there of how you can help contribute to this show. Another thing that would be great is if you join in live, like Juan has here. And the good thing is, I think he's running through some chat GPT or something, because he's putting some of that in the chat. So he's talking about just a little bit of a summary here. And he's saying it's frustrating because Horne hammers the same point. Australia coasts on luck, not skill. His tone is cynical. The writing drags, and it feels like a lecture rather than an engaging critique. That's probably a pretty good sum up of that. I don't know where Juan got that from, but that is a pretty decent observation of this book as a whole. I forgot to talk about similar books. I don't really have any similar books on Australian life. Have I done any before? Like, I've read a whole bunch of Australian books. Something like My Brother George or My Brother Jack, by George Johnston, Jack Johnston. Switching those names up if you type that in. My Brother Jack, I think it was George Johnston. That gives a fairly good description of Australian life in the that was World War II, I believe, that period. And that's probably one of the better books to try out instead of this if you want Australian life and culture. So we're going to be doing this live as usual. I will be on Wednesday, 11 a.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time for the next couple of months until I start traveling. Juan says he's got some books coming up. I haven't seen him post any. And next week will be doing The Gilded Age by Mark Twain. I've got The Price of Interest by Edward Chancellor. I've got The Bilingual Brain and Common Sense by Thomas Paine. I'll probably do book reviews of those, unless they're like really crappy. And yeah, lots of stuff coming up. I hope you enjoyed this episode as usual, and ciao for now. Until the next time. Bye. Kyron out.